Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The low hum of conversation filled the training room, but Sarah Martinez sat in silence, her hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee gone cold. She had spoken maybe 3 words that morning, yet somehow the silence said everything she needed. Around her, the other recruits filled the air with nervous laughter and too loud confidence, the kind that tried to disguise fear. They were all trying to prove something. She was, too, just not to them. Outside, the Virginia wind swept through the pine trees that bordered Quantico's advanced range, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of gun oil and wet earth. Sarah stared through the window, her reflection barely visible against the gray sky. 22 years old, small-framed, composed, the kind of person people overlooked until she picked up a rifle. Her father used to tell her that a rifle doesn't care who you are. It doesn't know your name, he'd said, teaching her to shoot in the backwoods of their Texas town. It only knows respect. You respect it and it'll speak truth for you. She still remembered his hands, scarred, steady, guiding hers as she squeezed her first trigger. The kick had startled her, but the precision, the silence after, had hooked her for life. That same silence followed her into this room full of strangers. "All right, listen up." Sergeant Brooks' voice cut through the chatter like a blade. The man didn't shout, he didn't have to. His presence filled the space with authority built from years of hard-earned respect. "Welcome to the United States Marine Corps Advanced Sniper Program. 90% of you won't make it. That's not a threat. That's statistics." A few recruits chuckled under their breath. Brooks ignored them. "You're here to learn what separates shooters from snipers. Out there you won't have comfort, time, or forgiveness. You'll have one shot, and if that shot fails, someone dies. Maybe you. Maybe someone you were supposed to protect. Don't think of this as a competition. Think of it as a reckoning." Sarah's heartbeat slowed as he spoke. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. There was a calm that came to her before moments of pressure, the same calm that had carried her through long hunts as a girl, or late-night target drills when her hands were shaking from exhaustion but her aim stayed true. After the briefing, the recruits moved toward the range. The smell of gunpowder and wet grass clung to the air, and Sarah felt the shift. This was where she belonged. She laid out her rifle on the bench like a ritual. Each piece mattered: the bipod, the scope, the sling. Her fingers traced the cold steel of the barrel, aligning the scope with careful, deliberate turns. The others were louder, adjusting gear, cracking jokes, hiding nerves behind bravado. But Sarah worked in silence. Every click of her scope adjustment sounded like punctuation in her own private rhythm. To her left, a tall man named Tony Castellano was bragging about his time overseas. "Real combat's nothing like this playground," he said loudly. "You don't get to polish your rifle in the field. You shoot fast or you don't shoot at all." His tone carried that blend of arrogance and insecurity Sarah had learned to recognize instantly. She didn't look up, didn't react. Brooks walked the firing line, boots crunching on the gravel, hands behind his back. "Martinez," he said, stopping behind her. "Yes, Sergeant." "You comfortable?" "Yes, Sergeant." He studied her rifle setup. "You checked elevation?" "Twice." "Good." He nodded once, then continued down the line. Praise was rare here, but that single nod meant more than words. Sarah exhaled, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. When the order came to fire, she steadied her breathing. The world narrowed to the scope's circle. The target, 800 meters away, swayed slightly in the wind. Around her, rifles cracked in staggered rhythm, sharp reports echoing across the range. But she barely heard them. Her father's voice came back to her. "The shot happens between heartbeats. Find that stillness, that fraction of nothing, and that's where you live." Her heart slowed, breath in, breath out, hold. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a controlled, familiar force. Through the scope, she watched the bullet strike center mass, clean and precise. No celebration, no exhale of triumph, just that quiet confirmation truth spoken through steel and math. Someone a few benches down muttered, "Damn." Sarah chambered another round, the motion fluid, practiced. She didn't need their approval. The target had already given it. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the instructors rotated teams through new exercises. Today's focus: team coordination under pressure. The board listed her assignment: Webb, Chen, Rodriguez, Martinez. She scanned the names. Webb, ex-Marine, 2 deployments. Chen, record-holding civilian marksman. Rodriguez, quiet, reserved, legacy military. She nodded to herself. Solid lineup. They gathered around a field table scattered with maps and wind charts. Webb took command easily, tracing his finger along the elevation contours. "We'll take positions here, 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 and here," he said, marking the map. "Targets at different distances, moving every 20 seconds. Communication is key. No one fires blind." Sarah listened, eyes flicking to the wind indicators drawn along the ridgeline. "Winds shifting every 100 meters," she said softly. "You'll need to call updates every shot." Webb looked up surprised. Chen nodded. "Good catch," she said. Rodriguez added, "The angle on target 3's going to magnify drift. We'll need extra compensation." Sarah didn't smile, but inside, she felt a flicker of something close to belonging. These were her people, not by words, but by precision. They split and took their positions. Sarah's assigned perch overlooked a valley painted in morning haze. From here, she could see everything: the range, the movement, even the heat shimmer rising off the grass. She checked her scope again, adjusted windage, tested her trigger pull. Every breath, every heartbeat was measured. "Team 4, check in." Webb's voice crackled over the comms. "Eyes on," Sarah replied. One by one, the others confirmed. "On my mark," Webb said. 3, 2, 1, engage." The first target moved. Sarah tracked it 700 meters partial cover. She waited for the precise moment it cleared the obstruction. A gust of wind shifted the flag near her. "Adjust." 1 click left. Inhale, exhale, hold. The trigger brake felt like the release of a secret. The bullet cut the air and hit dead center. "Target 4 down," she said calmly. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. The sequence ended with all 4 targets neutralized in record time. The instructors debriefed them afterward, short, professional, rarely expressive. But when Sergeant Brooks passed their group, he paused. "Good work, Team 4. Coordination was tight." His gaze lingered on Sarah. "Martinez, clean shot. Keep it up." For a split second, she felt something heavy lift from her shoulders. Weeks of quiet endurance, of second-guessing whether she truly belonged here, condensed into that single nod of recognition. As the day wound down, Sarah sat on a bench outside the range, cleaning her rifle piece by piece. The sun burned low, painting the training field gold. Around her, voices drifted: laughter, complaints, talk of tomorrow's drills. She stayed silent, methodical. "Hey," a voice said beside her. "Jennifer Chen, the Californian, you don't talk much." Sarah looked up, smiling faintly. Nothing to say. Chen sat down beside her, watching her work. "You shot clean today. That 700-meter hit, I saw the wind kick just before you fired." "Timing," Sarah said simply. Chen grinned. "You make it sound easy." "It's never easy," Sarah replied, sliding the bolt back into place. "That's why it matters." They sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence shared between people who understood effort without needing to explain it. When Sarah finally stood, her rifle gleamed, ready for tomorrow. The barracks were quiet that night, save for the muffled sounds of metal being oiled and rifles being reassembled. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep came slowly, her mind replaying the day in fragments: Brooks' nod, the sound of the shot, the soft click of the scope under her fingertips. But beneath it all, there was something else. A pulse of doubt, a whisper: "You belong here, right?" She turned onto her side, eyes tracing the pattern of light from the hallway filtering through the door crack. She had always been quiet, but never invisible. Yet here among the loudest, toughest, most confident, quiet could look like weakness. And weakness could get you cut from the program. She reminded herself why she was here. Not for medals, not for proving anything to anyone else. Her brother's photo was taped inside her locker door, the one who'd enlisted before her, who told her stories of people in the shadows, the ones who saw before anyone else did. "We don't shoot first," he'd said. "We shoot right." Sarah closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be harder. It always was. And somewhere deep down she sensed it. Something was shifting in the air, a current she couldn't yet see. Because this place wasn't just about skill. It was about survival of spirit, of dignity, of self. And though she didn't know it yet, by the end of this program, her silence, the same quiet everyone mistook for fragility, would become the most unbreakable thing about her. She exhaled slowly, the rhythm of her breath sinking to that familiar, measured calm. Outside, the night wind rattled the flagpole, the metal clinking faintly in the dark. It was the sound of everything she believed in: duty, precision, and the quiet courage to stand her ground when words weren't enough. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the new instructor look at her that way? The recruits stood in formation as the morning sun broke over the Virginia tree line, painting long shadows across the gravel. The air was cold enough to bite, the kind that sharpened every breath. Sergeant Brooks had said little during roll call, just a clipped announcement that the program would now enter advanced phase. Nobody knew what that meant. Until they saw him. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison. He moved through the ranks like a shadow carved from discipline. Tall, lean, not a word wasted. The kind of man whose silence wasn't absence, it was gravity. When he spoke, even the wind seemed to still. "I'm here to teach you what the manual doesn't," he said, voice calm, even. "You've learned how to shoot. Now you'll learn when not to." Sarah watched him closely. His presence was different, not performative like Brooks, not loud like the trainees. Controlled, measured, dangerous in the quiet way predators are. Morrison's reputation had preceded him: 2 combat deployments, over 30 confirmed kills, commendations he never mentioned but everyone whispered about. A real sniper, the kind who'd seen what the rest only trained for. He studied each recruit with a glance that seemed to measure weight and worth in a heartbeat. When his eyes reached Sarah, they didn't linger, but something in her chest tightened anyway. There was no malice in his look, just the quiet assessment of someone cataloging every weakness. "Some of you think you're good," he continued, packing the line. "Some of you might be, but I'm not here to stroke egos. I'm here to see who survives the test. And make no mistake, it is survival." No one dared speak. He stopped beside Sarah. "Martinez," he said, not asking for confirmation. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." He gave a faint nod. "Heard your shot at the range last week. Clean work." It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. But to Sarah, it meant more than she'd admit. That day's exercise started before noon. The recruits were driven to a mock combat village built deep in the woods, clusters of abandoned structures, shattered cars and shattered glass. It looked real because it was meant to. Here, Morrison said, they'd learned situational marksmanship, how to shoot under chaos. But the challenge wasn't just physical. Each sniper was alone. No teams, no spotters, only an earpiece, a rifle, and a scenario that changed minute by minute. They had to locate threats, decide whether to engage, and survive unseen. When Sarah received her packet, she studied it the way she did everything: slow, precise, deliberate. The mission brief was simple: observe the area, identify hostiles, neutralize only verified targets, avoid civilians, avoid detection. The complexity hit her immediately. This wasn't a test of accuracy, it was a test of judgment. She moved through the trees with steady rhythm, low, silent steps, each foot placed like punctuation in a sentence only she could read. The hide site awaited on a hillside overlooking the village. She set up slowly, camouflage netting, natural brush, the angle of the rifle barrel perfectly hidden under dead leaves. Even the scope reflection was shielded by shadow. Through the lens, the fake village came alive. Mannequins dressed as civilians, moving targets rigged with sensors, simulated patrols wandering the streets. Every detail designed to force split-second decisions. Then Morrison's voice cut through her earpiece. "Martinez, observation time starts now. Watch patterns, identify, confirm before engaging." Her breath steadied. She began to scan. Movement: 3 figures emerging from a building near the central square. Coordination: weapons slung. Their body language screamed trained, tactical. She marked them mentally. A few seconds later, a child-sized figure crossed their path. Civilian. She waited, breath suspended. The soldiers moved on. She adjusted windage, recalculated distance. She could take one now. But something didn't feel right. The angle, the exposure, the pattern of movement, too predictable. A decoy. She didn't shoot. Minutes later, a 4th figure appeared behind the group, less obvious, wearing different gear, directing them silently. That was the leader. That was the target. She waited for the window. Wind 3 miles per hour right to left. Distance 612 meters. The crosshairs settled, breath in, breath out, hold. The shot cracked the silence, echoing faintly across the trees. Through her scope, she saw the confirmation flash, target neutralized. Morrison's voice followed seconds later. "Copy, Martinez. Continue observation." She did, still, patient, invisible. 2 hours passed, 6 targets down, no civilian hits, no detection. When the call finally came, exercise complete, she withdrew methodically, erasing her tracks, recovering the foliage she'd disturbed. Her father's voice came back again, quiet and sure. "A good shot is one they never find." At the extraction point, Morrison waited. His expression was unreadable, but his tone wasn't unkind. "How do you think you did?" Sarah considered. "I engaged 6 confirmed targets, avoided civilian casualties, and maintained concealment." "Accurate summary," he said. Then after a pause, "Good shot placement, smart restraint, but you're too quiet." Sarah frowned slightly. "Quiet." "In a mission," Morrison said, "silence can kill. You'll have a spotter, command in your ear, maybe other elements depending on you. You've got to talk when it matters." Sarah nodded, understanding. It wasn't criticism, it was instruction. That night back at the barracks, she lay awake longer than usual. The words repeated in her mind. "You're too quiet." She'd been hearing that her whole life. Too quiet to lead. Too quiet to stand out. Too quiet to be noticed. And yet every victory she'd ever earned had come from that silence. The patience, the calm, the ability to breathe when others panicked. But maybe Morrison was right. Maybe silence could also be a cage. The next morning came with fog and fatigue. The team gathered again at the range, their movements slower, more deliberate. The easy confidence of the early weeks had worn thin. The program was breaking people, quietly, systematically. That's when the murmurs started, small, dismissive, poisonous. "She's only doing this well because the instructors go easy on her. She's the diversity pick, they can't fail her. You think she could handle real combat?" Sarah heard it. Everyone did. But she kept her eyes on her rifle, her fingers steady as she loaded the next magazine. Tony Castellano's voice cut through the whispers. "Look, I'm just saying, there's a difference between training and a firefight. Some folks crumble when the pressure's real." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Jennifer Chen shot him a glare. "Performance speaks for itself, Tony." He smirked, "Sure, until it doesn't." Sarah tightened a scope screw, not looking up. She could feel his stare, that mocking curiosity of someone who wanted to see her break. She didn't give him the satisfaction. When Morrison arrived, The tension thinned like smoke. Castellano shut up immediately. "Today," Morrison announced, "you'll shoot under direct observation. That means every mistake will be seen, every decision judged. You'll fire alone while everyone else watches." The air went still. Watching each other's failures was worse than any physical trial. They lined up behind the observation barrier as Morrison called the first name. One by one, trainees took the line, their performances dissected in real time. Some cracked under pressure, others just barely held on. When Castellano's name came up, he swaggered forward like he owned the dirt under his boots. Sarah watched closely, not out of rivalry, but curiosity. His setup was sloppy, too fast, his breathing uneven. His first shot missed wide, then another. By the end, he was sweating, movements jerky. Morrison's feedback was blunt. "Your fundamentals are weak. You lost composure after your first miss. Work on control before you try confidence." The words hit like a slap. Castellano's jaw tightened, eyes darting toward Sarah as if she'd somehow caused his failure. Then came her turn. She walked to the firing line slowly, aware of every eye tracking her movements. She could feel their doubts pressing against her like static. She set her rifle down, adjusted the bipod, checked the chamber. Her breathing evened out. The targets were staggered across nearly a kilometer, different distances, changing wind, unpredictable timing. She sighted the first 600 meters, fired, center hit. The second 700, corrected for crosswind, hit. The rhythm came back, the dance between math and instinct, control and surrender. By the time she reached the final target, 900 meters, partial cover, her pulse had slowed into that sacred cadence she knew better than any prayer. The shot landed perfect. When she stood, the silence that followed said more than applause ever could. Morrison's voice was level. "Excellent shooting under pressure, consistent, controlled. That's the difference between training and instinct." Sarah gave a short nod, stepping back into formation. But she could feel it, Castellano's stare burning into her side, sharp with humiliation. The kind that doesn't fade, it festers. Later, as they cleaned rifles in the dim light of the armory, she heard him again, whispering, louder now, to anyone who'd listen. "Sure, she can hit paper, but wait till there's real wind, real distance. Let's see how perfect she is then." Jennifer sighed beside Sarah. "Ignore him," she murmured. "He's not worth it." Sarah kept her focus on the brush gliding down her rifle barrel. "I know." But deep down, she also knew something else. People like Castellano never stopped until you gave them a reason to. And she wouldn't have to wait long. Because the next morning, when she stepped onto the range, the wind was stronger, colder. The world felt different. Morrison's tone was clipped, his instructions brief. "Advanced moving target engagement," he announced. "Variable speed, limited exposure, no second chances." Sarah adjusted her scope and realized with quiet dread that fate had a sense of irony. Castellano was assigned the lane right next to hers. He looked over that same crooked grin. "Nervous?" he asked. "Don't worry, some people just aren't built for pressure." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew what was coming, not just the test, but something more dangerous. A moment where words would fail and truth would have to be proven through action. The targets began to move. And before the morning was done, one challenge, one voice, one bullet would change everything. Why did he smile like that, like he already knew she would fail? The wind carried dust across the range that morning, stinging eyes and cutting through the warmth of the rising sun. The flags at the far end whipped violently, unpredictable, each gust rewriting the math of a perfect shot. It wasn't a good day for precision. It was a day for patience. Sarah checked her rifle one last time. Bipod locked, scope cleaned, chamber clear. Every habit she'd built since her first day repeated with surgical discipline. The others around her moved faster, laughing, stretching, shaking out their nerves. But she didn't. She never did. To her left, Castellano stood with his hands on his hips, smirk plastered on like armor. "You ever get tired of that?" he asked, nodding toward her rifle. "You treat that thing like it's gonna love you back." She ignored him, finishing her scope adjustment. "Guess not," he said, chuckling. "All that careful setup, what happens when there's no time to play with your toys? You gonna ask the enemy to pause?" Sarah didn't look up, didn't need to. The only answer she ever gave was the shot itself. Jennifer Chen was nearby, overhearing. "Maybe you should focus on your own gear, Tony," she said quietly. He laughed, low and mocking. "I'm focused, sweetheart. I just like a little entertainment before I outperform everyone." Morrison's voice interrupted, calm but sharp. "Positions." Instant silence. The exercise brief was simple on paper. Moving targets at variable speeds, limited exposure, one chance per shot. No corrections, no second attempts. A miss was a failure. But the conditions were merciless. Wind gusting left to right, speeds changing by the minute. Morrison didn't choose today by accident. He wanted to see who adapted and who broke. Sarah settled prone, her cheek against the stock. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, the grass waving across the range, the heat shimmer distorting distance, the faint red outline of the moving targets. She tuned out everything. The whispers, the footsteps, the muttered doubts. The silence inside her was its own kind of armor. "Line ready," Morrison called. The signal light flashed green. The first target appeared, a human silhouette gliding across 600 meters of open ground. Sarah tracked it, her movements smooth, measured. Lead angle, distance, wind correction. It was a puzzle she'd solved 1,000 times before. Her shot cracked through the air. The bullet found center. She reloaded steady. The second target emerged farther, faster. Another clean hit. The third, partial exposure, left edge of the field. A brief flicker in her scope, then another hit. By the time she reached her last target, her breathing had settled into that calm rhythm, the one that separated the anxious from the deliberate. The final target crossed the far ridge, its speed erratic. Sarah adjusted, waited, then fired. Impact dead center. 4 hits, 4 for 4. She cleared her weapon, safety engaged, chamber checked. Smooth, practiced motions. The kind of confidence earned through endless repetition. But as she sat up, she felt it, eyes on her. Castellano's shots had gone wide. His frustration was thick enough to feel in the air. And now, he was watching her like a man desperate for something to aim at. When Morrison ended the drill, Castellano barked out a laugh that didn't sound like humor. "Unbelievable," he said loudly, loud enough for the others to hear. "You'd think the wind didn't even touch her." Sarah ignored him. He stepped closer, tone sharpening. "You know what? I've got to see this up close. All these perfect shots, all this magic. Let's see the trick." "Castellano," Morrison warned, but the man wasn't listening. "Actually," Tony continued, grinning, "I've got a better idea. Let's make this interesting. Let's see how our star student handles a real challenge." Sarah slowly stood, rifle in hand. "That shot wasn't part of today's drill." "Yeah, I know," he said, pointing downrange. "That one." She followed his finger. A steel plate almost hidden in the haze. Nearly 1,000 meters away, angled, half covered by the rise of the terrain. It was one of the range's legendary qualification targets, meant for final evaluations, not practice. "That's the one they use to separate the real shooters from the rest," Castellano said. "Let's see if you can hit that, rookie." The word hung there, rookie, sharp as shrapnel. Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "That's not today's exercise." "Oh, so you only take the easy ones?" His smirk widened. "Figures." The others stopped talking. The air itself seemed to still. Even Morrison didn't step in. He watched quietly, deliberately, as if curious how she'd handle this. Sarah met Castellano's eyes. "If I make that shot," she said softly, "you stop questioning my place here." His grin faltered for half a heartbeat. "And if you miss?" "Then maybe you were right." He laughed, trying to shake off the weight of her words. "All right then, let's see what you've got." She didn't rush, she never did. Laying prone again, Sarah set her rifle in place. She went silent, not the silence of hesitation, but the kind born of total focus. The target shimmered far in the distance, barely visible through the heat. The wind danced along the valley, gusting, dying, then returning with a vengeance. She began to calculate. Distance, 998 meters. Drop, 36 feet. Drift, 1.2 meters right. Humidity, high. Temperature, climbing. It was all math and instinct. Numbers turned into muscle memory, rhythm, and breath. Morrison moved closer, folding his arms. His tone was low. "Take your time." He wasn't warning her. He was watching a lesson unfold. Castellano crossed his arms, grinned tight. "Yeah, don't choke, Martinez. Everyone's watching." She tuned him out. Through the scope, the world was still. The wind flags fluttered, hesitated, then steadied, a brief moment of predictability. That was her window. She adjusted elevation, 3 clicks up. Windage 2 left. Inhale. Exhale. Hold. The world disappeared. No sound, no crowd, no Castellano. Just her, the rifle, and the space between heartbeats. The trigger broke clean. The rifle bucked. 2 seconds of silence. Then, ping! A single metallic ring echoed down the range, sharp and final. Through the scope she saw it, a spark of light as the bullet struck the steel plate, right on the visible edge. Hit. Perfect. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke, no one breathed. Morrison checked through his spotting scope, his face unreadable. "Target hit," he said simply, but Sarah caught it, the faintest nod. Approval, respect. Jennifer Chen whispered, "Holy hell." Even Rodriguez exhaled in disbelief. Sarah cleared her rifle, stood, and slung it over her shoulder. Her movements were steady, unhurried. The quietest person on the line had just done the loudest thing imaginable. She turned to Castellano, her voice barely above a whisper. "We had an agreement." His grin was gone. The words hit him harder than any bullet. He didn't respond, just looked away, jaw clenched, face pale. Morrison stepped forward. "Excellent shooting under pressure," he said, his voice carrying across the range. "That's what discipline looks like." Sarah nodded once, then returned to her bench. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She simply began cleaning her rifle, the faint click of metal on metal cutting through the stunned silence. The other trainees drifted closer, murmuring among themselves. Some congratulated her quietly, others just looked at her differently, not as a novelty, not as a question mark, but as something undeniable. Even Brooks, watching from a distance, allowed himself the smallest smile. Sarah finished her cleaning, snapped the bolt closed, and looked up at the horizon. The wind had settled, the sun higher now. The flags barely moved. It wasn't the perfect shot that mattered, it was everything before it. The restraint, the patience, the courage to stay calm when someone tried to make her flinch. Jennifer came up beside her, voice soft. "You didn't even blink." Sarah shrugged. "He gave me a target, I took it." Jennifer smiled faintly. "You know he's never going to forget that, right?" "I hope he doesn't," Sarah said, sliding her rifle case closed. "Maybe next time he'll think before he talks." But later, lying in her bunk, Sarah didn't think about Castellano at all. She thought about her father again, his quiet voice echoing in her mind. Respect for the weapon comes first. Accuracy comes second. Everything else is just noise. He'd been right. And that day, when the noise had reached its loudest, she'd silenced it the only way she knew how, not with anger, not with pride, but with truth. The next morning she woke before dawn. The range was still, mist rising off the grass. She knelt beside her rifle case and ran a hand along its surface, feeling the faint scratch from yesterday's gravel. There was something steady in her now, something solid. Not confidence, not arrogance, conviction. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. But the world, she knew, wasn't finished testing her. Because in this line of work, every calm moment is just the breath before the next storm. And somewhere deep down, she could already feel it building. The next test wouldn't be about shooting. It would be about surviving what comes after. Why did victory feel so heavy? The 1,000-meter shot had ended the noise, but it also changed the air around her. In the days that followed, people spoke to her differently, quieter, more careful, as if every word risked exposing their own insecurity. It wasn't respect she felt from most of them. It was distance. And that distance could feel colder than any failure. Sarah moved through the base with her usual calm, but she could feel the shift, the sidelong glances, the whispered names when she passed, the silence that followed her into a room. "That's her," someone would murmur, not quite loud enough to be called speech. "The one who hit the impossible shot." It should have felt good. It didn't. Because excellent, she was learning isolates. In the mess hall, the usual noise of forks and laughter dulled when she entered. Even Jennifer, who had become something close to a friend, sat at another table that morning, nodding politely but saying nothing. Not avoidance, just space. The kind that comes when people stop seeing you as one of them and start seeing you as a standard they'll never meet. Only Morrison seemed unchanged. He found her on the range late one evening, when the others were long gone, and the sun was nothing more than a red bruise on the horizon. She was cleaning her rifle, as always, methodical and quiet. He approached with the measured calm of a man who never needed to hurry. "You're still here," he said, not really a question. "Routine helps," Sarah replied. He nodded, watching her work. "You know what the hardest part of being good is?" She looked up, meeting his eyes, staying that way. He smiled faintly. "That's part of it. But the real problem is everyone watching, waiting for you to fall. That's the price of being noticed." "I didn't ask for it," she said. "Doesn't matter, you earned it." He crouched beside her, the faint smell of dust and oil between them. "You're consistent. That's rare. But consistency can turn into armor, the kind that keeps you safe, but also alone." Sarah hesitated, not sure if it was advice or warning. "What do you suggest?" "Balance," he said simply. "Talk to people. Laugh if you remember how." She smiled, a small, reluctant thing. "I'm working on it." He stood, looking down the empty range. "You know that shot, the one that shut up Castellano, it wasn't the distance that impressed me." "No. It was the calm. You didn't flinch, didn't feed off the crowd. You made the world smaller until it fit inside your scope. That's what snipers do, they shrink chaos until it's manageable." Sarah followed his gaze to the far hill where the steel plate still stood, faintly dented from her bullet. "Most people," Morrison said quietly, "can hit a target. The rare ones learn when to pull the trigger and when not to. That's what makes a professional." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, leaving her in the fading light with the echo of his words. That night, as the barracks lights dimmed, Sarah lay awake again. She thought of his warning, armor that keeps you safe, but also alone. He was right. She'd built walls made of silence, focus, precision. They'd kept her alive here, but they also kept everyone else out. The next morning, the recruits were greeted by an unexpected sight. The familiar figure of Sergeant Brooks stood at the front, but beside him was Morrison, clipboard in hand, his expression all business. "Final phase begins today," Brooks said. "What you've done so far doesn't matter anymore. From here on, you'll operate as pairs. Fieldcraft, endurance, tactical judgment, coordination, all of it will be tested in real-time conditions." The room buzzed with quiet tension. Morrison continued, "You'll be deployed into a simulated operational zone for 48 hours. Real terrain, live communication drills, limited supplies. You'll establish hides, gather intel, and engage targets based on mission objectives. This isn't about hitting bullseyes. It's about thinking, surviving, and not being found." The recruits exchanged looks. This was the final crucible. Team assignments were posted minutes later. Sarah scanned the board and found her name. Martinez Rodriguez. She nodded. It made sense. David Rodriguez had been steady since day one, quiet like her but grounded. They worked the same way, deliberate, thoughtful, patient. Castellano's name was paired with someone else, and the relief she felt at that was immediate and unspoken. They left before dawn, rucksacks heavy, rifles secured. The transport dropped them miles into the Virginia wilderness, dense with pines and fog. Rodriguez adjusted his pack, glancing at her. "You good?" "Always," she said. "Guess we'll find out." They moved through the trees in silence, two ghosts threading through green and shadow. The terrain was unforgiving, damp, steep, full of echoes. Every step had to be earned. By midday, they found a ridge overlooking a valley that matched the mission map. The target area lay below, a scattering of structures meant to simulate enemy camps. Rodriguez crouched beside her. "Good sightlines here." "Too exposed," Sarah murmured. "We move 20 meters left. That brush line breaks our silhouette." He followed without question. 4 hours later, they had built their hide, a shallow depression under brush and deadfall, camouflaged so completely that even up close, it looked like nothing more than dirt and leaves. Sarah tested her scope, adjusting for light refraction through the mist. Rodriguez took wind readings, logging movement patterns below. The rhythm between them was unspoken, natural, the kind of coordination born from trust rather than talk. When the first target appeared, neither rushed. Rodriguez whispered, "Wind's light, too right." Sarah's crosshairs steadied. Distance 640, elevation adjusted. "Send it." The shot was silent in the stillness, suppressed by design. "Hit." They didn't celebrate, didn't even breathe hard, just logged the result and moved on. Hours passed, targets came and went. Each decision to shoot or not weighed heavier than the last. This wasn't about marksmanship anymore. It was about restraint, judgment, patience. At sunset, the fog thickened. Sarah leaned back, stretching her cramped legs. Rodriguez was watching the valley through binoculars, his tone low. "You ever think about what happens after this?" "After training?" "Yeah, when it's real." She hesitated. "Sometimes." "And?" "I think it won't feel much different," she said softly. "The math's the same, the pressure's the same, the stakes just get louder." He nodded slowly. "That's one way to put it." They shared a quiet laugh, brief but genuine, the first real one she'd had in weeks. When night came, the cold set in. They took turns resting, one always watching through the scope while the other slept in the damp earth. Hours blurred. Hunger, fatigue, silence, it all became part of the same rhythm. On the second day, a new set of movement patterns appeared in the valley. Larger group, more armed, different behavior. Rodriguez frowned. "Doesn't match the brief." "Could be an adaptive scenario," Sarah said. "Or a test." She studied them through the scope. The targets were civilians mixed with armed personnel. The simulation was testing judgment again, who to engage, who to spare. Morrison's voice crackled faintly in their earpieces. "Priority targets are mobile, confirm before engaging. Collateral equals mission failure." They watched for nearly an hour. Then, at last, one stepped forward, simulated high-value target, clearly marked by gear and formation. Rodriguez adjusted the rangefinder. 820, wind steady, you've got the cleanest angle." Sarah nodded. "Send it," he whispered. She found that familiar stillness again, the quiet place between chaos and decision. Her finger brushed the trigger. The rifle whispered once. Through her scope, she saw the target drop. "Hit confirmed," Rodriguez said. They stayed still, invisible, until extraction orders came through. When they reached the pickup point, their clothes were soaked, their hands raw, but their movements were steady. Morrison waited there, clipboard in hand, same unreadable expression. "Report," he said. "6 confirmed hits," Sarah replied. "No civilian engagement, 0 detection." "Hide integrity." "Maintained." He nodded. "Outstanding work." Then, after a pause, "You two just set the standard for the rest." Sarah didn't smile, but she felt something inside her, ease, not pride exactly, but peace. The debriefing was straightforward. Morrison's notes were precise. Excellent teamwork, sound decision-making, professional conduct. Sarah read the report later in the barracks and felt a quiet satisfaction. Yet, even as the others celebrated the end of the final phase, she couldn't stop thinking about Morrison's earlier words. "The real problem is everyone watching, waiting for you to fall." She knew what came next. The end of training didn't mean peace. It meant deployment. It meant entering a world where every shot, every silence carried consequence. That night, as the others laughed and drank weak coffee in the common room, Sarah sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the parade ground. Her reflection looked back at her, calm, tired, older somehow. She thought of Texas, of her father's hands, of her brother's stories about those who never came home. She thought of that 1,000-meter shot and how it had changed everything, and how, in a way, it had changed nothing at all. Because the hardest shots weren't taken with a rifle. They were taken in silence, in choices, in the moments between duty and doubt. And though she didn't know it yet, her next mission would demand a different kind of accuracy, one that had nothing to do with targets. It would demand her heart. Why did the air on deployment smell different, heavier, older somehow? When the ramp of the C-130 opened, heat and dust rushed in, tasting of metal and burnt fuel. Sarah blinked against the glare. It was Virginia anymore. It was somewhere far away, a desert with no edges, just light and silence stretching forever. She dreamed of this day once. Now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The orders had come fast. "Graduates with exemplary field marksman scores," the memo said, "will be attached for evaluation with operational units overseas." It sounded clinical on paper. In reality, it meant she was joining a team that lived and died by seconds. Morrison met her on the tarmac. Same steady eyes, same calm posture, now dressed for the field. "You ready, Martinez?" She adjusted her rucksack. "Ready as I'll ever be." He studied her for a long beat. "Keep your head clear. The first mission's never what you expect." Then he motioned her toward the waiting convoy. Inside the Humvee, the air reeked of dust and gun oil. 3 other soldiers filled the seats: Sergeant Weller, a medic named Pike, and an intel specialist called Haskins. They nodded curtly, each wearing the same expression Sarah recognized instantly, the look of people who'd seen too much and still came back for more. No one spoke during the drive. The desert rolled by, endless ridges, pale villages, children waving from roadsides. The horizon shimmered like a mirage of another world. Their destination was a forward operating base near the border, a scatter of prefabs surrounded by concrete walls and concertina wire. It wasn't large, just functional. The kind of place built for endurance, not comfort. Weller gave her the tour in clipped sentences. "You sleep when you can, eat what's there, and don't make promises about tomorrow." Sarah nodded, understood. That night she sat outside her tent, rifle across her knees, cleaning it by flashlight. The routine steadied her, the same rhythm she'd known since training. Click, wipe, slide, breathe. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog barked. A generator hummed. The desert wind carried sand like whispers. Morrison appeared out of the dark, crouching beside her. "You'll run Overwatch tomorrow," he said quietly. "Recon teams moving into the village at dawn. We'll have eyes on from the ridge." She nodded. "Rules of engagement." "Same as always," he said. "Confirm before shooting, no mistakes." No mistakes. The word sat heavy in her chest. At dawn, they moved out, Sarah and Morrison taking position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, their silhouettes hidden by netting and the long shadows of the morning sun. Below, the recon team advanced carefully through the village streets. Children ran between crumbling walls. Women carried water jugs. Nothing looked hostile, yet everything did. Sarah adjusted her scope. The glass magnified dust motes into worlds. Every movement, every flicker of light became a question, threat or not. "Eyes on," she whispered. "Copy," Morrison replied, scanning through his own scope. Hours passed like that, heat building, sweat dripping, eyes burning from the glare, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, movement. A figure emerged from a doorway across the square, tall, male, carrying something long wrapped in cloth. Sarah's finger tightened near the trigger. "Possible weapon," she said. "Hold," Morrison whispered. "Confirm." The man paused, unwrapping the cloth. It wasn't a rifle, it was a shovel. Sarah exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders in a slow wave. Negative, civilian. "Good call." He didn't praise often. He didn't need to. Those two words were enough. Minutes later, a burst of static crackled through the radio, the recon team's voices urgent. "We've got movement, North Alley." Sarah swung her scope. Two figures appeared, sprinting between buildings. This time she saw the glint of steel. "Armed," she said. "Range?" Morrison asked. 710. "Take the lead." She steadied her breathing. The shot wasn't difficult, but it wasn't training either. These weren't silhouettes. They were people. The reticle found the target's chest. She hesitated half a second, maybe less, then pulled. The crack echoed through her headset. The figure fell. The other disappeared into the maze of walls. "Target neutralized," Morrison confirmed. Silence followed, not triumph, not relief, just the strange stillness of consequence. Back at the base, the others congratulated her quietly. "Good shot," Weller said, clapping her shoulder. Pike offered her coffee. She nodded, grateful but distant. The moment replayed in her mind on a loop, not the shot itself, but the breath before it, the heartbeat of hesitation. That night she couldn't sleep. The air was too hot, the tent too small, her thoughts too loud. She stepped outside, walking past the quiet vehicles, past the perimeter lights, until she reached the far edge of the base where the desert began. The sky stretched forever, black velvet scattered with stars. She crouched, pressing her hand into the sand. It was warm, alive with memory. Morrison's voice came softly from behind her. "First one never leaves easy." She turned. He stood there, hands in pockets. No rank, no orders, just presence. "I hesitated," she admitted. "Good." She frowned. "Good. If you didn't, you'd be dangerous." She looked down at her hands, steady, still, but somehow heavier. "I thought it would feel cleaner." He nodded. "It never does, not if you're still human." For a long time they stood in silence, listening to the desert breathe. Finally she asked, "How do you keep going?" He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "You don't. You just keep doing the next right thing until the noise fades." When he left, she stayed there alone, staring at the horizon until the first hint of dawn turned the sand pale. The next week's blurred missions, Overwatch briefings. Every day began the same: prep, move, wait, decide. Every night ended with cleaning her rifle by lamplight, counting breaths, trying to feel less and less. But some part of her resisted that numbness. One afternoon, during a supply escort, an explosion hit the convoy ahead. Smoke bloomed black against the sky. Chaos erupted over the comms, shouts, static, confusion. Sarah and Weller sprinted toward the plume. Dust stung her eyes. A truck burned in the road, flames licking the tires. 2 men were down. Pike was already there, dragging one by the vest. "Cover us," he shouted. Sarah dropped to a knee, scanning rooftops. Through her scope movement, a glint of glass. She fired once. The glint vanished. "Clear," she called. Minutes later, it was over. The injured were stabilized. The fire died to embers. Weller exhaled, shaking his head. That was clean work, Martinez. But she didn't answer. She was staring at the wreck, at the twisted metal and the blackened road. The smell of fuel and blood mixed in the air, thick and bitter. That night she wrote in her field notebook, a habit she'd started to quiet her thoughts. The page read only. "The shot is easy. The silence after is not." Morrison found her again days later, sitting alone by the comms tower. He handed her a bottle of water and sat beside her. "You're holding up," he said quietly. "Mostly." He nodded. "That's all anyone does." They watched the horizon together, red and endless. After a while he spoke again. "You've got something most don't, patience without fear. That's rare." "I'm not fearless," she said. "I'm just tired of being scared." He looked at her then, really looked. "That's even rarer." The sun sank. The call to prayer drifted faintly from the village miles away, haunting and beautiful. Sarah closed her eyes. The sound moved through her like memory, like a reminder that the world kept spinning no matter who fell or survived. And as darkness spread, she realized something Morrison had been trying to tell her since that first day on the range. Precision isn't just about where you aim. It's about what you're willing to live with after the shot lands. Why did the map feel heavier than her rifle that morning? Orders had come at dawn, sealed and brief. Morrison handed them out in the operations tent, his face unreadable in the harsh fluorescent light. "High-value target," he said. "Suspected insurgent coordinator operating out of the old refinery compound north of the valley. We've tracked him for weeks. Command wants eyes, confirmation, and if conditions allow, elimination." He didn't look at Sarah when he said that last word, but she felt it anyway. Her throat tightened. "Engagement protocol. Standard, visual confirmation only. Zero collateral tolerance." Zero tolerance. The phrase that always sounded moral until you had to live inside it. They loaded up before the sun broke the horizon. Dust rose behind the vehicles in a long brown ribbon that vanished into the distance. The radio crackled faintly, logistics chatter, weather updates, background noise for the nerves. Sarah sat beside Morrison in the lead Humvee, her rifle cradled across her knees. "Who's on overwatch?" she asked. "You are," he said simply. "Weller leads ground team. You'll have eyes from the ridge east of the target. 2-man element, you and Pike." "Pike? Medic or not, he can shoot straight and I trust his calm. You'll need that." They arrived at the staging area just after sunrise. The refinery lay beyond a stretch of cracked earth, rusted towers standing like broken teeth against the pale sky. The air smelled of iron and dust, the ghosts of machinery and heat. Sarah and Pike moved out first, hiking to the ridge while the others prepped gear below. "You okay?" he asked, voice low but steady. "Fine," she lied. He smiled faintly. "You don't look fine." She didn't answer. She never did when fear disguised itself as focus. By the time they reached position, the sun had turned brutal. Through her scope, Sarah could see everything: the main compound, a cluster of sheet metal buildings, a few trucks. 2 men stood outside one of them, smoking, rifles slung casually. Pike settled beside her, binoculars raised. "That's our place." "Copy." She adjusted her scope, tracking heat shimmer. "Wind 1 left, distance 950. "Copy. No civilians visible." They waited. Hours passed like years. The ground baked beneath them. Sweat stung her eyes. Through the lens, the world shimmered, distorted, fragile. Then movement. A convoy of old pickups rolled into the compound. From the second truck, a man stepped out, older, gray in the beard, moving with the careful authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Possible target," Sarah whispered. Pike clicked his comms. Overwatch to Alpha, potential visual, sending image. Below, the recon team confirmed. Facial match 89%, that's him. Sarah's finger hovered near the trigger. "Command authorizes engagement," the radio said. She inhaled slowly, sighting in. The man turned, and in that instant everything stopped. A small figure stepped out from behind him. A child, maybe 7, maybe 8, clutching the man's sleeve, eyes squinting against the glare. Sarah froze. "Hold," she whispered. Morrison's voice came sharp in her ear. "Martinez status. Civilian in proximity. Minor, range 950, no clear shot. Copy, maintain visual." Minutes stretched. The man spoke to someone, gesturing toward the refinery gate. The child stayed close, never leaving his side. Then Morrison again. "Martinez, command says target will depart in 2 minutes. If he enters the convoy, we lose him. Can you take him clean?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She tracked the crosshairs along the man's chest, the child's outline just inches away. Negative, civilian obstruction. "Martinez," Morrison's tone changed, quieter, heavier. "This is your call." The radio buzzed with impatience. Weller's voice. "We can't let him slip. He's organizing strikes, you know what that means." Sarah adjusted, searching for an angle. The world narrowed to the heartbeat in her ears. She could see everything. The man's expression, the child's small hand, the distance between them shrinking with every breath. "Target entering vehicle," Pike murmured. "Command says take it if you can," came through the headset. She felt her pulse spike. She could end it now. Stop the man who'd built bombs, killed soldiers, torn families apart. But she could also end a life that hadn't even begun. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Morrison's voice again, quieter now, almost gentle. "Martinez, decide." The wind shifted, the dust cleared. Through the scope, she saw the child laugh at something, a small human sound swallowed by the desert. She lowered her rifle. "Negative shot," she said, her voice steady but final. "Child present, risk unacceptable." Silence filled the channel. Then Morrison, "Copy." A long pause. "All units withdraw." The convoy rolled out minutes later. Mission aborted. On the ride back, no one spoke. Pike sat beside her, silent, his face unreadable. Back at base, the debrief was cold. The commanding officer's tone was clipped, official. "You had authorization, Sergeant. Target escaped. Do you understand the operational cost of that decision?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Then justify it." She met his gaze. "Because a kill that costs your soul isn't a victory." The officer's jaw tightened. He scribbled something on his clipboard. "Dismissed." Outside, Morrison was waiting. He didn't say anything, just handed her a cup of water and nodded toward the edge of the compound. They walked until the bass noise faded behind them. Finally, she said, "They're going to flag me for this, aren't they?" "Probably," he admitted. "Command doesn't like clean hearts. They want clean reports." I froze. He shook his head. "No, you chose." She stared out at the desert, the horizon blurring into gold. "Maybe I should have pulled the trigger." He looked at her, calm, steady. "And then what? You think you'd sleep easier? You think that kid's face would fade any faster than the man?" She swallowed hard. "What if we see that man again, and next time he kills people we could have saved?" "Then we take him when we can," Morrison said. "But on the right terms. You don't trade innocence for efficiency, Martinez. That's how you lose yourself." She nodded, but her eyes burned. That night she didn't clean her rifle. She couldn't. She sat with it across her knees, hands unmoving, the metal cold as guilt. Outside her tent, the wind whispered against the fabric, carrying faint music from a radio somewhere. An old country song about home, about forgiveness. She closed her eyes and saw the child again. The way he'd laughed, the way the dust had lifted around his feet. In her dreams, the shot she didn't take echoed louder than any she ever had. Days later, a new report came in. The target had resurfaced, same region, same network. Command planned another strike, this time via air. No boots, no hesitation. Sarah read the memo in silence. Pike watched her from across the table. "You did what you had to do," he said softly. She nodded but didn't look up. "Then why does it feel like failure?" "Because you care." "Maybe that's the problem." He shook his head. "No, Martinez, that's the difference." That night she found Morrison again, sitting on the steps outside the command tent, coffee in hand. "They'll forget," he said without looking up. "They always do, you won't." "Maybe that's why I shouldn't be here." He finally turned to her. "That's exactly why you should." The desert wind rose again, kicking sand across their boots. She thought of that first day on the range, the silence before the shot, the calm she used to trust. But out here, silence wasn't calm. It was consequence. As she walked back to her tent, her reflection flashed faintly in the metal siding, tired eyes, a streak of dust on her cheek, a face harder than it used to be. She realized then that this was what war really did. It didn't just take lives. It took clarity. It blurred everything that used to be certain. And yet, somewhere deep down, she also knew this. Mercy had cost her today, but it had saved something she couldn't yet name, something small and fragile, still alive inside her chest. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was victory, too. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire ever had? It had been 10 days since the aborted mission, and the base felt different, colder, more watchful. Command had stopped calling her by name in briefings. Her presence was an afterthought now, a footnote in reports written by people who hadn't been there, hadn't seen what she'd seen. The official debrief called it failure to engage under conditions of opportunity. Unspoken, it meant something else. She hesitated, she soft. Soldiers didn't say it to her face, but she could feel it in the way they looked past her in the mess line, or how conversations dimmed when she entered a room. Even Pike, who'd been beside her that day, had grown quieter. Not distant, just careful. Everyone was careful now. Only Morrison stayed the same. He didn't defend her in meetings, didn't argue with superiors on her behalf, but every time she passed him, he gave her that same small nod. The kind that said, "You did right, even if the world calls it wrong." That nod kept her steady for a while. Then came the patrol. Routine recon, nothing more. Just a quiet sweep through a cluster of abandoned villages south of the river. She and Pike rode in the second vehicle, Morrison up front with Weller. The road was empty, the kind of emptiness that looked safe until it was. The explosion hit the lead vehicle first. A flash, a thunderclap, a wave of heat that ripped through the convoy like an unseen hand. The blast threw Sarah sideways, the world turning white and soundless. When she came to, the Humvee was on its side. Smoke filled the cabin. Pike was coughing, blood running down his temple. "Morrison," she shouted, voice shredded. No answer. She climbed out through the shattered windshield, boots slipping on glass and sand. The lead vehicle was burning, a column of black fire stabbing into the sky. "Pike, get the med kit," she yelled, sprinting forward. She could see Weller sprawled near the wreck, motionless. Another soldier was trying to drag him away from the flames. And then Morrison. He was half buried in debris, arm twisted, leg pinned beneath the vehicle frame. Alive, barely. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she tried to move the metal. It didn't budge. His eyes fluttered open. "Martinez." "Don't talk," she said, voice trembling. "We're getting you out." He coughed, blood staining his teeth. "Listen, radio command, call evac. Not leaving you." Now, his tone cut through the smoke like a blade. She hesitated, then ran for the radio. Pike was there, shouting coordinates into the static. "Convoy down, repeat, we are down, multiple wounded." Sarah grabbed her rifle, scanning the ridge. The silence after an ambush was never silence, it was waiting. Movement, shadows flickering along the rocks. "Contact," she yelled. Gunfire erupted, sharp and chaotic. She dropped prone, returning fire, her breathing automatic, precise. Every round was a decision, clean, cold, controlled. Minutes blurred, then the incoming fire stopped. The desert went still again. The medevac arrived 20 minutes later. They loaded the wounded, Morrison among them. He squeezed her wrist before they carried him onto the stretcher. "You did fine," he whispered. "Just hold on," she said. He nodded once, "Always." The helicopter lifted, rotor wash whipping dust into her face. She watched until it disappeared into the sky, then turned back toward the smoking wrecks. 3 dead, 2 critical, mission aborted. She didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night she sat alone behind the comms tent, staring at her hands. They still shook, not from fear but from the echo of adrenaline. Pike found her there. His head was bandaged, his expression heavy. "They're saying the intel was bad. The route wasn't cleared. It wasn't anyone's fault." "Someone still dies every time that's said," she murmured. He lowered himself beside her, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "Morrison made it to the field hospital. He's stable." She closed her eyes, exhaling the tension that had lived in her chest since the explosion. "Thank God." "You saved him," Pike said quietly. "Barely. Barely counts." She looked up at the sky, moonless, full of sand and stars. "You ever wonder how many times barely is enough before it's not?" He didn't answer. There wasn't one. In the following days, she was reassigned temporary relief duty while the investigation into the ambush ran its course. They called it administrative rotation, but she knew what it meant. They wanted her out of sight. Rumors spread. They always did. She'd frozen on the last mission. She'd been too cautious. She'd been too human. Each version of the story stripped her down further, until she was just a myth wrapped in judgment. When the report finally came in, it was short and brutal. No operational error identified. Mission failure due to hostile action. Secondary note: sniper restraint under review. That phrase, "under review," stayed with her like a scar. Weeks passed. Morrison remained in recovery, unreachable except for brief updates from med staff. The base kept moving, new faces, new missions, same dust. Sarah spent her days at the range, shooting alone. It was the only place that still made sense. Each shot cracked like punctuation, in a story no one else could read. One afternoon, while she was cleaning her rifle, a voice behind her said, "You're wasting perfection on ghosts." She turned. Weller. His arm was in a sling, face pale from burns, but his eyes were sharp. "Sorry." He waved that off. "Don't start with the formality. I've seen you shoot. You're better than this." "I'm still active duty." "For now," he said, "but you know how command works. They like their soldiers simple. You're not simple." She frowned. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's a warning." He sat on the bench beside her, wincing slightly. "You're too good to be invisible and too honest to be controllable. That's a bad combination in this business." She stared at the weapon on her lap, the light catching the steel. "Maybe I should have just followed orders." Weller snorted. "Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you'd be another name on the wall. The job's supposed to make monsters, but it's nice to know a few of us still remember what it means to stay human." She said nothing. Before he left, he added, "Morrison asking for you. He'll be back soon. Don't lose the part of you he believes in." That night she didn't sleep again. When dawn came, she walked out to the far perimeter, beyond the wire, beyond the noise, until she reached a ridge overlooking the endless plain. She sat there for hours, the wind tugging her hair loose, the horizon blurring into heat. For the first time since the blast, she let herself cry, quietly, privately, as if the desert could keep her secret. She cried for Weller, for the nameless dead, for the child she'd spared, for every shot she'd taken and every one she hadn't. When the tears stopped, she just breathed, slow, steady, like the pause between heartbeats her father used to teach her to find. That was when she heard the sound, the low thump of rotor blades in the distance. She turned. A chopper approached from the south, dust spiraling beneath it. When it landed, Morrison stepped out, limping, bandaged, alive. She stood there frozen as he walked toward her, leaning on a crutch but wearing that same faint smile. "Told you I'd hold on," he said. She didn't trust her voice. He looked at her rifle, still at it, huh? "It's the only thing that still listens," she said softly. He chuckled. "Then maybe it's time you had something that talks back." They sat on the ground, the helicopter's noise fading behind them. Morrison's voice was rough, gravelly. "They're sending us home. Stateside reassignment. You and me both." She blinked. "Home. Command wants to review everything. Your file, my command, the ambush, the missed shot. We're both due a debrief." "Translation," she said quietly. "They're deciding if we're worth keeping." He nodded. "Pretty much." She stared out at the horizon. "Do you regret it?" "What, not dying out there?" "No, teaching me to think before I pull the trigger." He smiled, faint and tired. "If that's a mistake, it's one I'll make again." The wind howled around them, carrying sand across the ridges. For a moment they just sat there, two soldiers framed against the endless emptiness, broken, alive, unfinished. Finally he said, "You did what I hoped you'd do. You remembered you were human." She looked at him, eyes shining. "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never does," he said, "but it's the only thing that lasts." They watched the sun climb higher. The world was still burning somewhere, still demanding decisions, still hungry for the kind of obedience that killed conscience. But for now, there was only this. A soldier who'd learned that silence could mean strength, and a mentor who'd taught her that morality was the hardest target to aim at. Tomorrow they would fly home, face the questions, the judgments, the endless justifications. But tonight, they just sat and listened to the desert breathe. Two survivors caught between duty and redemption. And for the first time in months, Sarah let herself believe that maybe mercy wasn't weakness. Maybe it was precision of another kind, the kind that saved something no weapon could. Why did home feel like foreign soil? The plane touched down at Andrews just after sunrise. The windows glowed gold with morning light, but the inside of the cabin was silent. Soldiers rarely speak on the flight back. There's nothing left to say when the engines hum that low and your mind is already somewhere else, halfway between what you've survived and what you've lost. Sarah sat near the rear, helmet in her lap, watching the light shift across the metal floor. The others stared straight ahead, faces empty, eyes heavy with that quiet fatigue you can't measure in hours or sleep. When they disembarked, Morrison walked beside her, still limping but steady. "You'll have to report first," he said. "They'll debrief you separately. Just tell the truth." "I always do," she murmured. "I know," he gave her a faint smile. "That's what worries them." The evaluation center was nothing like the desert. No wind, no dust, just glass, white walls, and the hum of air conditioning. Sterile, controlled. The kind of place that pretended war could be dissected on paper. They separated her from the others. A woman in civilian clothes met her in the corridor. "Sergeant Martinez," she said, her tone neutral. "This way, please." They led her into a room with one table, two chairs, and a small recording device. The woman, a psychologist, she introduced herself as Dr. Keene, sat across from her, tablet in hand. "This is an informal session," Dr. Keene said. "We're just here to understand your perspective." Sarah nodded once. "You've had a complicated rotation," Keene began. "Your file reads like a paradox: commendations for discipline, concerns for restraint, citations for precision, and a formal review for refusal to engage. How do you explain that? Sarah took a slow breath. By saying it's all true. Keene raised an eyebrow. You're aware your decision not to take the refinery shot caused operational losses. I'm aware, Sarah said quietly. I'm also aware that I didn't kill a child. The doctor typed something on her tablet. Do you believe moral judgment should override direct orders in combat? Sarah looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The white light buzzed faintly. I believe that if you lose your judgment, you stop being useful to anyone. Keene leaned forward slightly. Do you feel guilt? Sarah's hands tightened on the table edge. Every day. For what? For everything, for being right, for being wrong, for not knowing which is which anymore. Keene watched her for a long time. You've been through several engagements, lost people, saved people. What keeps you steady? Sarah hesitated. Then, discipline, and remembering that the rifle isn't supposed to make you God. It's supposed to remind you how small you are. For a moment the room was silent. Keene finally said, That's not an answer I hear often. Sarah gave a faint, humorless smile. Most people answer before they've had to live with the echo. The session ended quietly. No reprimands, no applause, just paperwork, always paperwork. Afterward, Morrison was waiting outside, leaning against the hallway wall. How'd it go? They listened, she said, but I don't think they heard. He chuckled softly. They never do. They walked outside together. The air smelled of rain and cut grass, strange after months of sand and smoke. What now? She asked. Temporary leave, he said. We both get a few weeks to remember how to breathe. She nodded. You heading home? He smiled faintly. Home, a moving target. For her, home was Texas. The same small town where her father had taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts, and her brother had enlisted with a grin that made promises life never kept. When she finally arrived, the world seemed too quiet. No orders, no radios, just whine through the mesquite trees and the soft chirp of crickets. Her father's old truck was still in the driveway, rust creeping along the door. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and oil like it hadn't aged at all. She stood in the living room for a long time, touching the frame that held her brother's photo in uniform. He'd died overseas, different war, same soil. She whispered to the photo, I understand now. That night she slept in her old room for the first time in years. The window still faced the fields. The rifle case sat beside the bed, unopened. In the morning she walked out to the back fence. The air was cool, the horizon painted in pale gold. She set up an old tin can on a post, her father's ritual. The first shot rang through the stillness, echoing across the fields, then another, then silence. But something was different. The shots didn't sound like they used to. They didn't sound like control. They sounded like questions, every one of them. By noon, a pickup rumbled down the dirt road. Morrison. He climbed out slowly, legs still stiff, and gave her that small half-smile. Heard you'd be out here. She shrugged, nowhere else to go. Funny, that's what I said when I got my orders the first time. They sat on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee between them. Command closed the investigation, he said. Sarah looked up sharply. Closed. Yeah, official report says your actions were situationally justified under ambiguity of collateral presence. In plain English, you followed your conscience, and somehow they found a way not to punish you for it. She laughed short, tired, real. Guess I'm lucky. He shook his head. No, lucky is walking away with no ghosts. You earned this one the hard way. They sat in silence a while. Birds drifted across the wide Texas sky. Finally, Morrison said, They offered me a desk job. You'll take it. He smiled faintly. I think I've taught enough people how to aim. Time to learn how to heal. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I don't know what comes next for me. Then you're finally where you're supposed to be. She glanced up. What do you mean? He leaned forward, elbows on knees. You spent your whole life trying to control everything, your breathing, your shot, your silence. But life isn't the range, Martinez. You can't calculate the wind out here. You just stand in it. His words landed softly, but deeply. That night after he left, Sarah sat by the window again. Outside, the field stretched quiet and endless. The stars burned clean above them, the same stars she'd seen over the desert, only less cruel. She thought of the refinery, of the boy, of the shot she didn't take. She thought of Weller, Pike, Morrison, of all the moments that had shaped her without asking permission. She whispered to the night, I didn't freeze. And for the first time, she believed it. Weeks passed. The rhythm of normal life returned, almost. Mornings of coffee and silence, afternoons at the range teaching local recruits, evenings spent writing in the old notebook she'd carried through deployment. But every page read differently now. No more statistics or ballistic notes, just reflections. You can teach precision, she wrote once, but not peace. You can measure wind, not conscience. One evening, the local sheriff stopped by. He'd heard about her record, her calm. You ever think about helping train our deputies? He asked. She smiled politely. Maybe, but I don't train people to shoot anymore, I train them to see. He didn't understand, most wouldn't, but Morrison would have smiled at that. And sometimes, when she sat on that same porch at dusk, she imagined him somewhere else, older maybe, sitting on another porch, staring at another horizon, thinking the same quiet thoughts. The nightmares came less often now. When they did, she didn't fight them. She let them pass through like wind across an open field. She learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about refusing to let the past decide how steady your hands could be. One morning, as the sun rose pink over the horizon, Sarah drove out to a veterans' range outside town. There were others there, some old, some young, all carrying the same invisible weight. She didn't talk much, just helped when asked, adjusted someone's grip, fixed a stance, calmed a shaking breath. A teenage girl approached her at the end of the day, holding a rifle awkwardly. You're that Marine sniper, right? The one from the story. Sarah smiled faintly. Depends which story you heard. The one where you didn't take the shot. Sarah hesitated, then she nodded. Yeah, that one's true. The girl bit her lip. My brother in basic, he says you were brave. Sarah looked at her for a long time before replying. Your brother's wrong. The girl frowned. Then what were you? Sarah's voice softened. Human. The girl seemed confused, but nodded anyway, as if she somehow understood more than she realized. That night Sarah sat alone again, watching the stars rise above the fields. The same sky, the same silence, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. She thought of her brother's words years ago, we don't shoot first, we shoot right. Now she finally understood what he meant. War had taken everything, clarity, peace, certainty. But it had left her one thing in return, the courage to be quiet in a world that mistook silence for weakness. And in that quiet, she found something close to redemption. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout, doesn't fight for attention, doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes it simply stands still. And when the world demands, you pull the trigger. Dignity waits, listens, breathes. Then only when the heart is sure it acts.